The emergency klaxon split the Nevada dawn like a blade through silk. At Nellie's Air Force Base, coffee cups froze halfway to lips as the unmistakable wail of a scramble alert echoed across the tarmac. In the briefing room, 23 pilots snapped to attention, but their eyes weren't on the overhead display showing incoming bogies. They were watching Captain Raina Ghost Voss methodically fold her flight suit sleeves, her movements precise as a surgeon's despite the chaos erupting around them. Colonel Marcus Kane burst through the door, his weathered face grim. "We have multiple unidentified aircraft penetrating restricted airspace over Area 51. Fast movers, flying in formation, electronic signatures unlike anything in our database." His steel-gray eyes swept the room. "This is not a drill." The pilots exchanged glances. Area 51 wasn't just classified, it was mythically classified. Whatever was happening out there had rattled someone high up the chain of command badly enough to scramble every available aircraft at America's premier fighter weapons school. "Sir," Lieutenant Bradley "Hotshot" Morrison called out, his Texas drawl thick with skepticism, "are we talking about actual unknowns? Or is this another one of those black project tests where they forgot to file the paperwork?" Kane's jaw tightened. "Son, I've been flying military aircraft for 27 years. I know the difference between a missed memo and something that doesn't belong in our sky." He clicked his remote, and the overhead display flickered to life, showing radar returns that seemed to dance and weave in impossible patterns. These contacts appeared simultaneously at 17 different points along our perimeter at 5:47 hours. They're maintaining perfect formation, while pulling G-forces that should liquefy any human pilot. A nervous laugh rippled through the room. Morrison leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "So we're chasing UFOs now. What's next, Colonel? Alien abduction insurance?" But Ghost wasn't laughing. She studied the tactical display with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. Something about the flight patterns nagged at her, familiar yet wrong, like a song played in the wrong key. Her fingers drummed against her thigh in the rhythm she'd learned during her 3 tour in Afghanistan, a nervous tick that surfaced only when her instincts screamed danger. "The contacts are heading directly toward Las Vegas," Kane continued, his voice cutting through the scattered chuckles. "Estimated time to populated areas 37 minutes. We have presidential authorization to intercept and identify. Rules of engagement are weapons tight unless fired upon." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "This is happening, people. Whatever these things are, they're not filing flight plans or answering radio calls. We're America's last line of defense between the unknown and 8 million civilians." The room fell silent except for the distant roar of engines spinning up on the flight line, where crew chiefs were already pulling covers off aircraft that hadn't seen combat readiness in months. The scramble to the flight line was controlled chaos, 23 pilots racing toward their assigned aircraft while ground crews swarmed like ants around a kicked hill. Ghost found herself running alongside Morrison and Captain Jake Viper Castellanos, their boots pounding against the asphalt in perfect synchronization, despite the tension crackling between them like electricity before a thunderstorm. "I still say this is some kind of test," Morrison panted, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. "Pentagon loves their war games. Remember that fake invasion scenario last year?" Viper shook his head, dark hair whipping in the wind generated by a nearby F-16's engine startup. "My buddy at NORAD says their screens lit up like Christmas morning. Every tracking station from Colorado to California is painting the same picture." He vaulted over a low concrete barrier with practiced ease. "This isn't smoke and mirrors, Bradley. This is real." Ghost remained silent, her mind racing through combat procedures she'd hoped never to use again on American soil. The rhythm of her breathing matched her stride, a meditation technique learned from an old Apache pilot who taught her that panic was just excitement without proper channeling. But as they approached the aircraft lineup, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Her assigned F-16C Viper sat at the end of the row, pristine and deadly, but it wasn't the sleek fighter that caught her attention. It was the A-10 Thunderbolt II parked in the maintenance area, seemingly forgotten among the newer, sexier jets. The Warthog looked tired, almost resigned, its gray paint scheme weathered from countless hours of close air support missions. Most pilots called it ugly. Ghost had always called it beautiful. "Voss," Colonel Kane's voice cracked across the tarmac like a whip. "Change of plans. Your F-16 has a hydraulic leak. Maintenance says 20 minutes minimum." His expression was apologetic but firm. "I need you in the air now." Morrison jogged backward, grinning. "Looks like Ghost gets bench duty today. Don't worry, sweetheart, we'll handle the real flying." His laughter carried on the wind as he reached his aircraft, ground crew already lowering the canopy ladder. But Kane wasn't finished. His weathered hand pointed toward the A-10, and Ghost felt her pulse quicken. "That Thunderbolt just came out of depot maintenance. She's fueled, armed, and ready to fly. You're our most experienced close air support pilot. If these bogies turn hostile over populated areas, we'll need someone who can thread the needle." Ghost nodded once, professionally, but inside her chest, something long dormant began to stir. She'd flown A-10s for 6 years before transitioning to fighters, had brought wounded soldiers home on wings riddled with bullet holes, had walked through valleys of death with nothing but titanium armor and twin General Electric engines singing their throaty song of defiance. As she approached the Warthog, muscle memory took control. Her hands moved automatically through the external inspection, checking control surfaces, examining the massive 30mm GAU-8 cannon that formed the aircraft's spine like some prehistoric predator's tooth. The ground crew chief, a grizzled technical sergeant with 20 years of wrench time, watched her with approval. "Ma'am, she's a good bird. Fresh engines, new avionics suite, and I personally loaded every round of ammunition." He handed her the maintenance log, pride evident in his voice. "Whoever's waiting out there is about to meet 2,000 pounds of democracy delivered at supersonic speeds." The emergency klaxon wailed across Nellie's Air Force Base one final time, its urgent cry fatting into the desert wind as 23 engines roared to life simultaneously. Ghost settled into the A-10's cockpit, her hands finding controls that felt like extensions of her own body despite months of flying faster, more modern fighters. The seat embraced her like an old friend, worn leather molded by countless hours of previous pilots, but somehow perfect for her frame. Around her, the cockpit hummed with familiar energy. Green displays cast an eerie glow across her face as systems came online, flight controls, weapons systems, communication arrays all singing in electronic harmony. She pulled on her helmet, the weight comforting and substantial, then began the startup checklist with practiced efficiency. "Tower Ghost 1, ready for taxi," she transmitted, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Ghost 1, cleared to taxi runway 03 left via taxiway Alpha. Winds 040 at 15, visibility unlimited." The air traffic controller's voice carried an edge of tension that hadn't been there during routine training flights. Behind her, F-16s and F-15s were already moving, their sleek forms cutting through heat shimmer rising from sun-warmed concrete. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio, filled with his characteristic swagger. "Ghost, try to keep up back there. Those turboprops weren't built for speed." She keyed her microphone once, a brief click that acknowledged the transmission without dignifying it with words. The A-10's twin turbofan engines spooled up with their distinctive whistle, and she felt the aircraft's 11,000 pounds of empty weight shift as she added power. Unlike the needle-nosed fighters ahead of her, the Warthog moved with purposeful deliberation, every component designed for punishment rather than performance. At the runway threshold, she performed her final checks while watching Morrison's F-16 streak into the sky, afterburner painting orange flames against blue Nevada heavens. Viper followed 30 seconds later, his departure more controlled but equally impressive. One by one, America's finest pilots launched themselves toward an enemy they couldn't identify, flying machines that represented decades of technological advancement and billions of taxpayer dollars. Then it was her turn. Ghost 1 cleared for takeoff. Fly heading 270, climb to flight level 250. Ghost 1, Roger. Heading 270, climbing to 250. She advanced the throttles to military power, feeling 18,000 pounds of thrust press her back into the ejection seat as the Warthog accelerated down the runway. At 90 knots, she pulled back on the stick, and the aircraft lifted off with characteristic determination rather than the violent acceleration of a fighter. This was how the A-10 did everything, steadily, reliably, with absolute commitment to the mission. As Las Vegas sprawled beneath her wings 20 minutes later, Ghost found herself flying tactical formation with aircraft that could outrun her, outclimb her, and outgun her in air-to-air combat. But none of them carried her experience, and none of their pilots had learned to see death from above the way she had during 3 tours in Afghanistan's most dangerous valleys. The radio crackled with increasing urgency as air traffic controllers vectored civilian aircraft away from the approaching unknowns. Commercial flights diverted to alternate airports, private aircraft ordered to land immediately, and the normally busy Las Vegas approach frequency fell ominously silent except for military transmissions. "All call signs, this is Overlord," Colonel Kane's voice cut through the radio chatter from his command post. "Bogies now bearing 290, range 40 miles, altitude varying between 20 and 60,000 feet. They're not responding to any radio calls, and their electronic signatures are unusual." Morrison keyed his radio immediately. "Define unusual, Overlord." A pause, then Kane's voice, carefully controlled. "Their radar cross-sections are approximately the size of a school bus, but they're maneuvering like fighters, and they're pulling sustained G-forces that exceed anything in our technical manuals." Ghost felt ice form in her stomach. She'd flown against the best pilots in the world during red flag exercises, had matched skills with Israeli aces and British Typhoon drivers, but she'd never encountered anything that defied the basic laws of physics that governed flight. "Overlord Ghost 1, she transmitted. "Request permission to climb to Angels 30 for better observation angle." "Negative, Ghost 1. Maintain current altitude and formation. We need you ready for close air support if these things make it to populated areas." She rogered the transmission, but continued studying the tactical display on her multifunction screen. The unknown aircraft were maintaining perfect formation while executing maneuvers that should have scattered them across 50 miles of sky. Whatever was piloting those craft possessed either technology far beyond human capability or reflexes that operated faster than human nervous systems could process. The desert landscape scrolled beneath her wings, familiar territory made alien by the knowledge that something unprecedented was approaching the city where 2 million people went about their morning routines completely unaware that history was being written in the sky above them. "Contact, contact." Viper's voice exploded over the radio, professional calm shattered by whatever he was seeing through his radar scope. "I have visual on the bogies. Jesus Christ, what the hell are those things?" 20 miles ahead, at the extreme range of human vision, Ghost caught her first glimpse of the unknowns. They appeared as dark specks against the morning sky, but even at this distance, something about their movement patterns seemed wrong. They didn't fly like aircraft. They flowed like liquid mercury, their formations shifting and reforming with mechanical precision that no human pilot could maintain. "All call signs, weapons tight, Kane's voice commanded. "Maintain safe distance and observe. Do not engage unless engaged. Repeat, do not fire unless fired upon." Morrison's F-16 was closest to the unknowns, his aircraft a tiny silver dart against the vast blue canvas of desert sky. Through her radio headset, Ghost could hear his breathing becoming rapid and shallow as whatever he was seeing up close challenged everything he understood about aerodynamics and flight physics. "Overlord Hotshot," he transmitted, his earlier bravado completely absent. "These things, they're not like anything I've ever seen. They're rotating around their vertical axis while maintaining forward flight. That's impossible. Nothing should be able to do that without tearing itself apart." Ghost advanced her throttle slightly, climbing toward the engagement area while staying within the Colonel's altitude restrictions. The A-10's turbofan engines responded with their characteristic whistle, and she felt the aircraft's familiar vibration change as it transitioned from cruise flight to tactical maneuvering speed. Whatever was about to happen, she wanted every available knot of airspeed and every foot of altitude she could legally maintain. The radio traffic intensified as more pilots achieved visual contact with the unknowns. Each transmission painted a picture of aircraft that violated fundamental principles of flight mechanics, craft that could hover motionless one moment, then accelerate to supersonic speeds without visible propulsion signatures, machines that turned inside their own radius while maintaining perfect formation integrity. But it was Viper's next transmission that changed everything. "Overlord, be advised, I count 24 bogies, not the 12 we were briefed. They just appeared. No radar signature, no visual acquisition. They were just suddenly there." The morning sun climbed higher over Nevada, casting sharp shadows across the desert floor 8 miles below Ghost's wings. She maintained formation with the F-16s and F-15s spread out ahead of her, their sleek forms cutting through air, made thin by altitude and bright with possibility. But the radio chatter filling her headset painted an increasingly disturbing picture of the enemy they were approaching. "Overlord Viper, the bogies are changing formation again. They're arranging themselves in a perfect hexagon. Each aircraft is maintaining exactly the same distance from its neighbors, down to the foot. No human pilot can fly that precisely." Colonel Kane's response crackled with static and tension. "Copy, Viper. Continue observation. All call signs maintain current heading and altitude. Do not close within 10 miles of the unknowns." Ghost studied her tactical display while listening to her fellow pilots describe maneuvers that challenged everything she understood about flight dynamics. The unknowns were apparently executing coordinated turns that subjected them to G-forces exceeding 20 times the pull of gravity, loads that would reduce human pilots to unconscious pulp within seconds. Yet they maintained perfect formation integrity throughout maneuvers that should have scattered them across hundreds of miles of airspace. "Ghost, this is Hotshot," Morrison's voice cut through her concentration. "You're awful quiet back there. Still think this is just another training exercise?" She keyed her microphone once, offering only the brief click that acknowledged his transmission without validating it with words. The A-10 flew steady and true beneath her hands, its controls firm and responsive despite being designed for ground attack rather than high-altitude intercepts. Around her, the cockpit maintained its familiar green glow, systems functioning with mechanical reliability that had kept her alive through countless combat missions in Afghanistan's unforgiving mountains. But her mind was elsewhere, processing tactical scenarios and threat assessments with the methodical precision that had earned her 3 distinguished flying crosses, and the grudging respect of pilots who initially dismissed her as an affirmative action case. The unknown's flight characteristics suggested technology decades ahead of anything in America's classified inventory, but their behavior patterns indicated intelligence, possibly artificial intelligence operating at superhuman speeds. "All call signs, this is Overlord," Kane transmitted. "Be advised, NORAD is tracking additional contacts approaching from multiple vectors. We now have unknowns penetrating restricted airspace at 17 different locations across the continental United States. This is a coordinated incursion." The words hung in the thin air like a death sentence. Ghost felt her pulse quicken as the implication sank in. This wasn't a reconnaissance flight or a probe of American air defenses. This was a systematic penetration of sovereign airspace by forces unknown, using technology that rendered conventional military responses obsolete. Ahead of her formation, Viper's F-15E Strike Eagle waggled its wings, the international signal for "Follow me," as he began a gentle turn toward the unknowns. The morning sun caught his aircraft's gray paint scheme, transforming the fighter into a silver arrow pointing toward destiny. Through her headset, Ghost heard the subtle changes in her fellow pilots' breathing patterns that indicated rising stress levels. Morrison's characteristic swagger had evaporated, replaced by the focused professionalism of a pilot who suddenly understood he was facing an enemy beyond his experience or training. "Range to bogies now 15 miles, Viper reported. They're maintaining altitude at 45,000 feet, speed steady at 400 knots. Formation is still that perfect hexagon, but they're rotating the entire pattern around its center point. It's like watching a drill team in the sky." Ghost climbed steadily toward her maximum service ceiling, using every available foot of altitude to position herself for whatever was coming. The A-10 wasn't designed for high-altitude combat, but it was built to survive punishment that would destroy more fragile aircraft. If the situation deteriorated into actual combat, she wanted every tactical advantage physics and engineering could provide. The radio suddenly erupted with overlapping transmissions as multiple pilots achieved close visual contact simultaneously. Through the chaos of voices, Ghost heard words that made her blood run cold. "Christ, they're beautiful, and nothing human built those things, and most disturbing of all, they're watching us. I can feel them watching us." Morrison's voice cut through the confusion, steady now with professional assessment. "Overlord hotshot. Visual confirmation on 24 unknowns in perfect hexagonal formation. Aircraft appear to be approximately 60 feet in length, no visible wings or control surfaces. They're maintaining formation through pure thrust vectoring, rotating around their vertical axis every 30 seconds while maintaining forward flight. This is beyond our current technology by decades, possibly centuries." A new voice joined the radio frequency, calm and authoritative with the unmistakable cadence of command authority that extended far beyond a single airbase. "All callsigns, this is checkmate. I have oversight authority for this intercept. Continue observation, but under no circumstances are you to engage these aircraft unless directly attacked. Repeat, weapons tight unless fired upon." Ghost recognized the voice as belonging to a general officer, though she couldn't identify which one through the electronic distortion of military radio encryption. Whoever checkmate was, he possessed authority that made Colonel Kane seem like a junior officer, and his presence on frequency suggested this incident had attracted attention from the highest levels of military command. The unknowns continued their mesmerizing dance 45,000 feet above the Nevada desert, their perfect formations and impossible maneuvers creating a display that was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. As Ghost watched her tactical screen, she began to notice patterns in their movements, subtle variations in timing and spacing that suggested communication protocols or perhaps navigation references she couldn't interpret. But one thing was becoming clear. Whatever intelligence controlled those aircraft was studying the American intercept force with the same intensity the American pilots were studying them. This wasn't just a violation of sovereign airspace. This was first contact between human and non-human intelligence, and the entire exchange was being conducted in the universal language of aviation, where intentions were communicated through flight patterns and relative positioning. The morning sky over Nevada had become a classroom where two species were teaching each other the boundaries of possibility. 20,000 feet below the strange aerial ballet, Las Vegas continued its daily routine with blissful ignorance. Traffic flowed along the strip, tourists lined up for breakfast buffets, and casino workers began their shifts completely unaware that human military pilots were making contact with technology that challenged every assumption about physics and aerodynamics. The contrast between mundane human activity and the extraordinary encounter unfolding overhead created a surreal disconnect that Ghost found deeply unsettling. Overlord, this is Viper. The bogies are descending. Current altitude 40,000 feet and decreasing at 500 feet per minute. They're maintaining formation integrity, but they're definitely coming down toward us. Kane's response carried barely controlled tension. Copy, Viper. All call signs maintain current altitude and heading. Do not climb to intercept. Repeat, do not engage unless engaged. Ghost watched her altimeter as she continued her own climb, now passing through 28,000 feet in pursuit of every available foot of tactical altitude. The A-10's engines were working hard in the thin air, but they maintained their characteristic whistle that had become her personal soundtrack during countless combat missions. Around her, the cockpit systems hummed with electronic efficiency, but she found herself relying more on instinct and peripheral vision than instruments. Something fundamental was changing in the tactical situation. The unknown's descent wasn't random. They were positioning themselves for optimal observation of the American aircraft, possibly testing response times and maneuvering capabilities. Every movement they made generated data that could be analyzed and used to develop countermeasures against human flight techniques. "Checkmate, this is Ghost One," she transmitted, breaking radio discipline for the first time during the intercept. "Request permission to climb to Angels 40 for enhanced observation angle." A pause, then the general's voice, interested now rather than simply authoritative. "Ghost One, checkmate. State your aircraft type and tactical assessment." Ghost One is flying an A-10 Thunderbolt II. Tactical assessment. The unknowns are conducting systematic reconnaissance of our formation capabilities and response protocols. They're gathering intelligence on American air combat doctrine. Sir, respectfully, we're being studied. Morrison's voice cut in, sharp with irritation. "Ghost, you're flying a ground attack aircraft. Leave the tactical analysis to actual fighter pilots." But Checkmate's response validated her assessment. Ghost One climbed to 40,000. All other call signs maintain current altitude and continue observation. Ghost One, you're our eye in the sky. Report anything unusual. As she climbed toward 40,000 feet, Ghost felt the familiar sensation of entering the realm where Earth's atmosphere began its gradual surrender to space. The sky above took on a deeper blue hue, and the desert below transformed into an abstract pattern of browns and tans interrupted by the geometric precision of human civilization. At this altitude, the curvature of Earth became barely perceptible, a subtle reminder of humanity's small place in a vast universe. The unknowns maintained their perfect hexagonal formation 35,000 feet below her, but from her elevated position, Ghost began to notice details that hadn't been visible from lower altitudes. The aircraft weren't simply rotating around their individual vertical axes. They were also executing subtle position changes within the overall formation, creating patterns that reminded her of complex mathematical equations written across the sky. Overlord, Ghost One. From 40,000 feet, I can observe the entire formation. The bogies are creating geometric patterns that suggest advanced computational intelligence. They're not just flying in formation, they're communicating through coordinated movement. Viper's voice joined the frequency, professional curiosity overriding tactical concerns. "Ghost, can you describe the patterns?" She studied the formation below, her pilot's eye trained to recognize subtle changes in aircraft positioning that might indicate hostile intentions. The hexagon rotates clockwise for 30 seconds, then counterclockwise for 30 seconds. During each rotation, individual aircraft shift position by exactly the same increment. It's like watching a combination lock with 6 tumblers, each one moving in precise sequence. The implication hung unspoken over the radio frequency. If the unknowns were indeed operating a combination lock, the question became what they were trying to unlock. Were they accessing human communication frequencies? Were they downloading data from satellite networks? Or were they simply demonstrating technological capabilities that rendered human defensive systems obsolete? Morrison's F-16 had closed to within 10 miles of the formation, close enough to observe fine details that weren't visible from longer range. His next transmission carried a note of wonder that cut through his earlier skepticism. Overlord, hotshot. The bogies have no visible propulsion signatures. No engine exhaust, no heat distortion, no sonic booms despite maneuvering at speeds that should generate significant acoustic signatures. Whatever's keeping them airborne operates on principles we don't understand. From her perch at 40,000 feet, Ghost maintained overwatch while processing tactical data that challenged every assumption about aerial combat. The unknowns had achieved perfect three-dimensional positioning while demonstrating maneuverability that exceeded human aircraft by orders of magnitude. If they chose to engage, the outcome would be determined not by pilot skill or aircraft performance, but by the technological gap between human and non-human engineering. But they showed no hostile intentions. Their formations remained precise but non-threatening. Their altitude changes gradual rather than aggressive, and their overall behavior suggested curiosity rather than malice. Whatever intelligence controlled those aircraft seemed more interested in observation than confrontation. The sun reached its zenith over the Nevada desert, transforming the landscape below into a shimmering tapestry of heat mirages and stark shadows. At 40,000 feet, Ghost flew in crystal-clear air, where every detail of the tactical situation stood out with photographic clarity. The unknowns maintained their hexagonal formation with mathematical precision, each aircraft occupying its assigned position, as if guided by invisible rails through three-dimensional space. But something was changing. The rotation patterns were becoming more complex, with individual aircraft executing maneuvers that seemed to violate basic principles of inertia and momentum. They would stop instantaneously, hover motionless for several seconds, then accelerate to supersonic speeds without visible propulsion signatures or sonic booms. All call signs, this is checkmate, the general's voice cut through her observations. Be advised, we have additional unknowns appearing on radar screens across the continental United States. Current count is approaching 200 aircraft, all exhibiting identical flight characteristics. This is now a national security event of the highest priority. Ghost felt the ice in her stomach spread through her chest. 200 aircraft represented a force structure that could overwhelm American air defenses through sheer numbers, regardless of their technological superiority. But more disturbing was the implication that whatever intelligence controlled these aircraft possessed manufacturing capabilities that could produce complex aerospace systems in quantities that human industry required years to achieve. Ghost 1, this is Viper, her flight leader transmitted from 15,000 feet below. You have the best observation angle up there. Are we looking at reconnaissance or invasion? She studied the formation with the analytical eye that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments, looking for subtle indicators of hostile intent. But the unknown's behavior remained consistent with observation rather than aggression. Their formations were aesthetically pleasing rather than tactically optimal. Their maneuvers demonstrated capability without threatening human aircraft, and their overall positioning suggested they were more interested in being seen than in achieving tactical advantage. Viper Ghost 1. My assessment is reconnaissance with demonstration of capability. They want us to see what they can do, but they're not positioning for attack runs. This feels like introduction. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio, tinged with disbelief. Introduction. Ghost, you're talking about first contact with alien intelligence. That's science fiction, not tactical reality. But even as he spoke, the unknowns began executing a new formation change that transformed their hexagonal pattern into something that made Ghost's breath catch in her throat. The 6 aircraft repositioned themselves into a perfect representation of human DNA's double helix structure, rotating around their central axis, while maintaining the complex geometry that had baffled scientists for decades after its discovery. "Overlord all call signs," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the implications. "The bogies have just formed a double helix pattern. They're demonstrating knowledge of human molecular biology. This is definitely intentional communication." The radio frequency fell silent except for the whisper of static and the distant sound of 23 pilots processing information that challenged their understanding of humanity's place in the universe. Below them, 2 million Las Vegas residents continued their daily routines while overhead, the most significant moment in human history unfolded with mathematical precision and terrifying beauty. Colonel Kane's voice finally broke the silence, steady with command authority, but edged with the recognition that standard military protocols had become inadequate for the current situation. "All call signs, maintain current positions. We are no longer conducting an intercept. We are participating in first contact with non-human intelligence. Every action from this point forward will be scrutinized by historians for centuries to come." The weight of that responsibility settled across Ghost's shoulders like a familiar flight jacket. She had trained for air-to-air combat, ground attack missions, and tactical reconnaissance, but nothing in her military education had prepared her for the role of humanity's representative during first contact with technology that rendered human capabilities obsolete. Yet as she maintained her position at 40,000 feet, watching alien aircraft demonstrate impossible maneuvers with casual precision, she realized that perhaps her background in close air support had provided exactly the right training for this moment. In Afghanistan, she had learned to operate in ambiguous tactical situations where the enemy possessed capabilities she couldn't match, where survival depended on recognizing intentions through behavior patterns, and where the difference between friend and foe often came down to subtle interpretations of movement and positioning. The unknowns continued their DNA helix formation for exactly 3 minutes, long enough for every human pilot to recognize the pattern and understand its significance. Then they smoothly transitioned back to their original hexagon, as if demonstrating that their scientific knowledge was just one small sample of capabilities they possessed. Ghost keyed her microphone for a transmission that would appear in history books alongside the Wright brothers' first flight and Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier. "Checkmate, Ghost 1. The bogies have completed their demonstration. They know who we are, they understand our biology, and they possess technology that makes our aircraft look like antiques. But they're not attacking. They're introducing themselves." The general's response carried the weight of decisions that would reshape human civilization. "Copy, Ghost 1. All call signs. We are now in Communication Protocol Alpha. No aggressive maneuvers, no weapons systems activation, no hostile actions of any kind. We are representing the United States of America and the human race. Make us proud." High above the Nevada desert, where the sky began its gradual transition to the infinite blackness of space, Captain Reyna Ghost Voss found herself at the center of humanity's first contact with intelligence from beyond Earth. The A-10 Thunderbolt II that carried her through this historic moment had been designed to destroy Soviet tanks in European battlefields, but instead it had become humanity's chariot for meeting the unknown. Below her wings, the alien aircraft continued their intricate dance, each movement a word in a language humans were only beginning to understand. The morning sun cast their shadows across the desert floor like dark prophecies, while overhead, the eternal blue of Earth's atmosphere framed a conversation between species that would determine the future of human civilization. As Ghost maintained her vigil at the edge of space, she couldn't help but smile at the irony. They had laughed at her in training, dismissed her as a pilot better suited for ground attack than air-to-air combat. But now, flying an aircraft they considered obsolete, she had become humanity's eyes and ears during the most important military encounter in human history. The laughter had stopped. In its place was something far more valuable, the recognition that competence and courage mattered more than the prejudices of those too limited to see beyond their own assumptions. The desert wind whispered across her wings as she flew into history, carrying humanity's hopes on wings built for war but used for peace. As the sun climbed toward its noon apex, the tactical situation evolved into something resembling a formal diplomatic meeting conducted at supersonic speeds 35,000 feet above ground. The unknowns had established a stable hexagonal formation that rotated slowly around its center point, while the American aircraft maintained respectful observation distances that conveyed non-hostile intentions without appearing submissive. Ghost observed the entire encounter from her elevated position, noting subtle details that might be lost at lower altitudes. The alien craft moved with mechanical precision that suggested artificial intelligence, yet their formation changes displayed an aesthetic sensibility that implied consciousness rather than mere programming. They were creating art in the sky while demonstrating technological capabilities that rendered human achievements insignificant by comparison. Ghost 1, this is checkmate, the general's voice cut through her analysis. I need your assessment of their tactical capabilities. If this situation turns hostile, what are we facing? She considered the question with the analytical methodology that had made her one of the Air Force's most effective close air support pilots. The unknowns had demonstrated instantaneous acceleration, impossible maneuvers, and perfect formation flying while apparently violating fundamental laws of physics. Against such capabilities, conventional military tactics would prove less effective than throwing stones at lightning. Checkmate, Ghost 1. Tactical assessment. If they wanted us destroyed, we would already be debris falling toward the desert floor. Their technology exceeds our defensive capabilities by several orders of magnitude. Our best strategy is peaceful communication and hope they share our preference for nonviolent contact. Morrison's voice interjected with characteristic skepticism. Ghost, you're advocating surrender before we've even engaged. These could be reconnaissance units for a larger invasion force. But Viper supported her assessment. Hotshot, look at what they're showing us. Perfect flight control, instantaneous maneuvers, technology that operates without visible propulsion. If they wanted to invade, they wouldn't need reconnaissance. They'd just arrive and take whatever they wanted. The radio frequency crackled with static as pilots processed implications that challenged their entire worldview. Below them, the unknowns continued their slow rotation, each aircraft maintaining its precise position within the hexagonal pattern, while executing individual maneuvers that demonstrated capabilities beyond human engineering. Ghost noticed something else. The aliens were gradually descending, not aggressively or threateningly, but with the careful precision of aircraft preparing for landing approach. Their current altitude of 30,000 feet put them within the operational envelope of human aircraft, suggesting they were positioning themselves for closer interaction. Overlord Ghost 1. The bogies are descending to 30,000 feet. They're entering our altitude band for potential close-range communication. Recommend all aircraft maintain current positions and prepare for possible direct contact. Colonel Kane's response reflected the weight of commanding American pilots during humanity's first encounter with non-human intelligence. Copy, Ghost 1. All call signs, maintain current positions. Weapons remain tight. We are now in active diplomatic contact with unknown entities. Every action will be recorded and analyzed by future generations. As if responding to Kane's transmission, the unknowns executed a formation change that transformed their hexagon into a perfect circle, with each aircraft maintaining equidistant spacing around the circumference. The pattern rotated slowly, creating a visual display that reminded Ghost of a clock face marking the passage of time. But it was their next maneuver that elevated the encounter from tactical situation to genuine communication. The six aircraft simultaneously climbed to 35,000 feet, positioned themselves in a straight line facing the American formation, then executed a series of maneuvers that unmistakably represented mathematical concepts: sine waves, logarithmic spirals, and finally, the golden ratio expressed through aircraft positioning. "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered over the radio. "They're teaching us mathematics, advanced mathematics." Ghost felt something shift in her chest as she watched beings,